Obstruction. Let's look at some examples. Talk about what the rule is and the base awards for the levels for NFHS, for high school, for NCAA, and for OBR, official baseball rules, which we'll use in American Legion. So obstruction is committed by the fielders. I think of fielders instead of defense just to remind myself OF, the word of. And that helps remind me that obstruction is committed by the fielders. It helps me differentiate that from the word high, which I use to remember that the hitters commit interference. The offense, the hitting team commits interference, and obstruction is committed by the fielders, of and high. Just something that works for me when I'm trying to remember what the proper term is in the moment. So obstruction. Let's start with high school. In high school baseball, if you call obstruction, you must give a minimum of a one base award. It doesn't matter if the runner was going back to a base, whether it's a pickoff or a batter runner rounding first, going back to first base. If you call obstruction, however it happened, you must award at least one base. You can award more than one base. If a kid hits a ball in the gap, man, he's rounding first and he's obstructed by the first baseman, and you see the ball still out in left center and you believe the kid could have gone into third, and he tries to go to third and he gets thrown out by a couple steps, you can call time and award third base for the obstruction. But for high school baseball, a minimum of one base if you call obstruction. So I try to be careful and not call it if a kid is just going back to a base casually and somebody's in his way. I just want to make sure that he gets back to the base. Now, if there's like a back pick during that time, then yeah, you would need to protect him and call it. But if you see the ball is fairly far away when obstruction happens and there was no intent, either because the kid was going back to a base or he was slowing down, rounding a base, and he had no intention of going to the next one, and you see obstruction, if there's no possibility of him getting backpicked, then I'm just not going to call it, because I don't want to award a base when he had no intention of even trying for the next base. And that's for high school. I might just talk to the fielder and just say, hey, by the way, buddy, make sure you're not in the way, or I might have to, bang you for obstruction. As far as calling obstruction, if you're going to call it when you see it. Don't wait to see how the play plays out if you're going to call it. Call it when you see it, because at the end of playing action, you might, if the runner, is out by a step or two and you're going to give him the base based on the obstruction, you're going to want to hope that people heard you when it happened. So you can go back and kill, time. You're at third base, you're at second base, whatever, on the obstruction. And hopefully that's the second time that the ballpark or the coaches or the players heard you say obstruction. The first time is when it happened. The second time is when you're awarding the base afterwards, if necessary. But obviously it makes your argument, if you need to explain yourself, it makes your side of the argument a lot more powerful if you called it when you saw it, nice and loud, as opposed to nobody heard it, and now you're undoing an out call on the bases, and nobody remembers you calling it, so they're going to wonder what the heck you're talking about, right? So if you're going to call it when you see it, make sure you call it. Moving on to NCAA and OBR. They both have two types of obstruction. In high school, there's just one. You call it, you're going to have to award at least one base. NCAA and OBR, you have type 1 and type 2 obstruction. Type 1 is obstruction of a runner when a play is being made on him. A very common example will be on a rundown. If on a rundown, a fielder ends up obstructing the runner. That is type 1 obstruction. That is an automatic dead ball. Time, and you award 1 base at a minimum for type 1 obstruction. I'm trying to think if there's any scenario where you would award more than 1. For right now, let's just think about that rundown, and you would award 1 base on that rundown for obstruction. Kill it right away because a play was being made on him. The defense can't get, any more outs or even that out of it. So you're going to time it, kill it, time, and move that runner 1 base. Even if he was going back to a base, type 1, you must award 1 more base beyond the last legally obtained base. So you're going to send him forward 1 base on a rundown, even if he was going back. Same thing if there's a pickoff at first and you believe the first baseman dropped the leg and blocked the base and obstructed him before he had the ball, then you're going to call obstruction. There was a play being made on him, so that's type 1 obstruction. You're going to call time. You're going to give him second base. So it doesn't matter which direction he was heading on in the base paths, he's going to get the next base with type 1 obstruction. So pickoffs, rundowns, maybe a dribbler down the first baseline. I've seen where the pitcher and the first baseman converge to try to field the ball, and the pitcher gets it, and then the first baseman forgets to get out of the way, and the runner has to slow down. If you have a situation like that, that would be type 1 obstruction because a play is being made on the runner. Same thing, time, award him, in that scenario, award him first base for the obstruction. Now, NCAA and OBR have also type 2 obstruction, which is obstruction on a runner that a play is not being made on. A typical one might be if he's rounding a base and the ball's out in the outfield and somebody obstructs him, either going forward or returning to a base. You can call that no matter what, because with type 2, you don't have to award a base if it's type 2. If there was not a play being made on him, you call the obstruction, and then you put him wherever you think he would have been or ended up at if there had not been obstruction. So if he's just kind of cruising and slowing down and he's obstructed, call it, because you don't have to award another base. You can just say you were going to protect him back to the last legally obtained base. You don't have to award 1. Now you can, of course, if there's a ball in the gap and the first baseman after first base obstructs the runner, the batter runner, as he's rounding first base, you can call it and then decide afterwards where you're going to protect him to. Like, oh, I think he would have second easily, so I'm going to protect him to there. And then watch the play develop. Don't kill it if it's type 2. Because if he tries to extend that, if I believe he would have gone into second, and I'm going to protect him there on that ball in the gap, and then he foolishly tries to go to third after the obstruction, he keeps going past second, tries to go to third and gets thrown out by half the distance between the bases, gets thrown out by 45 feet, gets thrown out by 5 or 6 or 7 strides. I'm not going to protect that. I'm not going to say that the obstruction is the reason that he was thrown out by that much, unless he fell over during the obstruction. But so in that scenario, we let it play out with type 2 because the defense still might get an out if the runner tries to advance beyond the base that you were going to protect him. If it's a speedy runner and the ball was crushing the gap and I see obstruction after first base, I might decide when I call the obstruction and I read the play that I am going to protect him to third if he tries to go to third. If he doesn't even try to go to third, then no, don't give him a base he didn't even attempt to get to, unless you really believe that he stumbled and fell and stopped at second and didn't keep going because of the obstruction. But otherwise, if it's a small obstruction, I'm going to call it. And if he kind of cruises into second base, I'm going to keep him at second base. That's where I would have protected him to. But you can protect him beyond that if you believe that he would have gotten third base without the obstruction. It's up to you to, on type 2, where you're going to protect him to. And it might simply be back to a base. Like we said, if he's slowing down when the obstruction happens or he's going back to a base, on a type 2, not on a pickoff, that would be type 1, but on a type 2, if he's going back to a base after a base hit and he gets obstructed or he's slowing down, you're just going to protect him to that base that he just acquired. You're just going to protect him against a back pick, but you're deciding that he made no effort to keep going, so we're not going to give him that next base. It's your choice on type 2, and that's for OBR and for NCAA. Quick recap, NFHS, if you call it, you're awarding one more base at a minimum. If there was a base hit and you call it and you think he would have gone a third, you can give him 2 bases. So in high school, if you call it, you must award 1 base. So be careful about calling it on something ticky-tack or on his way back to a base, unless it was a pickoff or a back pick. NCAA and OBR, there's type 1, plays being made on the runner, and he's obstructed. You're going to kill it, give him the next base. Type 2, no plays being made, the ball is somewhere else, and he's obstructed. You can call it and then decide to either give him 1 or more bases or just protect him back to the base he just last touched. And make sure that if you're going to call it, make it a big call to, again, make it easier to defend later. That's a big call. It's going to cost somebody some outs or some bases. So call it, be big. And if it's not type 1, let the play develop. If it is type 1, you're going to kill it right away. If it's type 2, delayed dead ball. Wait to see what happens. Because like we said, maybe he gets thrown out by 50 feet, trying to go beyond the base you would have protected him to. And then you've got nothing, but you have to let that play develop.